The Garden of Eternal Twilight, the forgotten path. The sun had already begun to sink beneath the horizon when Elenor stepped off the dusty road. Her boots crunched softly on the dry grass, and the distant hum of the wind carried the scent of lavender and old pine. She didn't know why she turned down that barely visible trail between the trees. It wasn't on her map. There were no signs, but something about it whispered to her, not in words, but in a feeling. A gentle pull, like a warm hand resting softly on her shoulder, guiding her with kindness. Elenor had been walking for days, maybe weeks. She no longer counted time in hours or distances. All she knew was that she was tired. Not just the tired that comes from walking too long or sleeping too little, but the kind of tired that rests deep in the bones, quiet and heavy like a long winter. The path was narrow and covered in soft moss. It weaved between old trees, their trunks twisted with age, their roots like sleeping animals curled beneath the earth. The deeper she walked, the quieter the world became. Birds did not sing here. The wind had no sharpness. Time seemed to hush itself in respect for whatever lived in this forgotten place. Elenor paused, resting a hand against a birch tree. Its bark was smooth and pale, and she felt the coolness of it seep into her palm. She took a breath, then another, letting her shoulders fall. For the first time in a long while, she realized she wasn't in a hurry. There was nowhere urgent to be. The forest welcomed her like an old friend. She walked on, deeper and deeper, until the light changed. At first, she thought it was dusk, but dusk did not last this long. The light around her became soft, silver gold, the kind that hovers just before nightfall, but never quite turns dark. Shadows stretched lazily across the ground, and the leaves above shimmered as if catching some inner glow. The air was cool, but not cold, and Elenor noticed that her tiredness had begun to lift. Her limbs still ached, but the ache felt distant now, like a dream she had woken from. Soon, the path widened into a clearing. At its center stood a gate, not one made of metal or stone, but of vines and flowering branches, woven together with a kind of natural grace that no human hand could match. The blossoms were pale blue, glowing faintly in the twilight. The gate stood open. Elenor hesitated, her heart fluttering. Beyond the gate, she saw the beginning of a garden. Winding paths, lanterns hanging from trees, and a soft mist that danced gently over the ground. It looked like something from a tale her grandmother might have told her by candlelight. A single word echoed in her mind: enter. So she did. As soon as she passed beneath the arch of the gate, something shifted. The air became warmer. The scent of lavender deepened, and a quiet hum filled the space. Not noise, but presence. It was as though the garden breathed. She followed a cobbled path edged with silver grass and wildflowers. The lanterns above her glowed with no flame, casting halos of golden light. Everywhere she looked, the garden pulsed with life. Not busy, not loud, but serene, aware, ancient. A soft breeze touched her cheek, and it carried no chill, only comfort. As Elenor walked, she noticed benches carved from smooth stone, small ponds with lily pads as big as platters, and butterflies that shimmered like stardust. And then she saw the first figure. It was a woman, or something like a woman. standing beside a willow tree with silver leaves. Her dress flowed like water, her hair long and soft as clouds. Her eyes met Eleanor's, and though she did not speak, her gaze held a kindness that settled all fear. "You've come far," the woman said at last, her voice as light as wind through grass. "But you are not lost." Elenor didn't know what to say, but her lips parted anyway. "Where am I?" The woman smiled gently. "You are in the Garden of Eternal Twilight, a place for those who have forgotten how to rest." Elenor blinked, her throat tight. The words hit her deeper than she expected. "I didn't know I needed rest," she whispered. "Most don't," the woman replied. "Not until they arrive." And with that, the woman turned and began walking down a side path shaded by tall, flowering trees. Elenor followed. They walked in silence, and it was the kind of silence that felt full, like everything around them was quietly singing a lullaby. Birds cooed softly in the trees. The ground whispered beneath their feet, and the mist swirled around them like a gentle embrace. Finally, they reached a small round cottage nestled beneath an ancient tree. Vines crawled lovingly over its roof, and its windows glowed with a warm golden light. A wooden door stood slightly open, and from within came the smell of tea and old books. "This will be your place," the woman said, pausing at the threshold, "for as long as you need." Elenor stepped inside. The room was simple but perfect. A soft bed with thick blankets, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and tiny bottles of glowing liquid, and a chair beside a fire that crackled without smoke. She turned to thank the woman, but she was gone. Alone in the soft golden room, Elenor sat in the chair and let her eyes close. Outside, the garden whispered, the eternal twilight, holding her gently like a mother's arms. And for the first time in many, many years, she began to fall asleep. The language of leaves. Elenor awoke to the soft crackle of a fire and the aroma of herbal tea wafting through the air. The light in the room had not changed. It was still that same silver golden twilight, gentle and unhurried. There was no urgency in her body, no weight pressing her to rise, no sharp thoughts waiting to jab her from sleep. She simply opened her eyes because they felt ready to open. For a long moment she lay there, gazing at the ceiling beams, each one etched with delicate carvings of vines and stars. The blanket around her was heavy and soft, like a cloud woven with moss. She did not know how long she had slept. In this place, it didn't seem to matter. When she finally sat up, she found a small wooden tray placed beside the bed. A steaming cup of tea, pale lavender in color, waited patiently. Next to it was a folded note written in flowing, unfamiliar script. Yet as she opened it, the letters reshaped themselves into words she could understand. Drink slowly. The garden speaks best to those who listen gently. She took the cup in both hands. It was warm, not hot, fragrant but subtle. As she sipped, the tea left a softness on her tongue, like velvet, and a calm washed through her limbs. With each sip, the quiet outside the cottage deepened, not in volume, but in presence. It was as if the entire garden was waiting for her. After finishing the last drop, Elenor stepped outside. The cottage sat beneath a towering tree whose leaves shimmered like pearls. The path ahead had changed, or perhaps it had always been this way, and she hadn't noticed. Flowers she couldn't name opened slowly as she walked past, releasing faint glows of blue, gold, and violet. She wandered without direction, but the path beneath her feet guided her. Every turn felt natural, every bend was an invitation, and always the twilight light bathed everything in a soft, otherworldly peace. Soon, Elenor found herself in a glade where hundreds of trees stood in a perfect circle. Their trunks were slender and pale, their leaves whispering constantly, even though the air was still. In the center of the glade stood a pedestal carved from white stone. Upon it lay a single object, a book with a cover made of bark and silk. She approached it slowly. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, the whispering in the leaves stopped. Silence fell over the glade. Thick and deep, yet not empty, she opened the book. There were no words, only symbols, sketches of vines, clouds, and strange, curling patterns that seemed to shift when she blinked. And yet, she understood. It wasn't reading in the traditional sense. The book spoke in feelings. Each page stirred emotions, memories, and visions not quite her own. A peaceful evening near a riverbank. The sensation of falling snow melting on warm skin. A child laughing beneath a willow tree. As she turned the pages, she began to weep, not from sadness, but from release. Each image, each feeling unraveled a tight knot in her chest that she hadn't realized was there. The burden she'd carried all her life, an undefined weight of worry, grief, and tiredness, began to lift thread by thread. When she closed the book, the trees began whispering again, but this time she understood them. Not in words, but in meaning. They were telling her stories, stories of others who had come before. Travelers, dreamers, wanderers like her. People who had been broken, lost, or simply too tired to keep pretending everything was fine. And each one had found their way to the Garden of Eternal Twilight. The trees remembered them all. Elenor sat beneath one of the trees and listened. Hours, or perhaps moments, passed. Time did not demand anything here. The stories washed over her, soothing, layered with truth and peace, and within them she began to hear echoes of her own life. Not the sharp moments of pain or regret, but the soft ones she had forgotten. The first time she felt the rain on her face as a child. The day her father held her hand and pointed to a rainbow. The silence of snow falling on her coat. She had not known how deeply she missed those memories. Then a rustle in the bushes. She turned, and there stood a fox. Not a normal one, but something gentler, more luminous. Its fur was a silvery gold, and its eyes glowed faintly like twin moons. The fox didn't run or fear. It simply watched her. After a moment, it bowed its head slightly and padded away, glancing back once. Elenor stood and followed. They moved slowly through the garden, and wherever the fox stepped, the grass seemed to hum. Birds perched above in silence, watching with calm interest. The path they followed narrowed until it came to a brook that sparkled with light. The fox stopped beside it and looked at her. A stone bridge arched over the brook, and beyond it was a new part of the garden, deeper, darker, yet still inviting. The fox tilted its head as if to say, "When you're ready." Elenor looked down at the brook, and for the first time, she saw her reflection clearly. Not as a woman worn down by time and worry, but as someone beginning again. Her face was softer, Her eyes no longer clouded. She looked peaceful, whole. She didn't cross the bridge, not yet. Instead, she sat down beside the fox. It lay beside her, tail curled over its paws, eyes half closed. The breeze danced gently across the water, and in that moment, Elenor understood the most important truth of this place. The garden was not here to fix her. It was here to remind her she had never been broken. The Keeper of Dreams. The fox slept beside her as the soft wind carried the scent of night-blooming flowers across the stream. Elenor sat in quiet stillness, her fingers resting gently on the grass. She could feel the pulse of the garden through it, a soft, steady rhythm that seemed to beat in time with her own heart. She didn't know how long she sat like that. Minutes, hours, it didn't matter. The twilight never deepened, nor did the light fade. Everything in the garden existed in a perfect moment that neither hurried forward nor pulled backward. Eventually, the fox stirred. It rose to its feet, gave her a long, silent glance, then crossed the small stone bridge. This time, Elenor followed without hesitation. The air on the other side of the brook was cooler, wrapped in a light mist. Trees stood taller here, their trunks ancient and wide, covered in soft moss that glowed faintly with a silvery hue. The lanterns hanging from the branches emitted a gentle blue light. Every step she took seemed to echo slightly, like walking through a sacred hall. After a short walk, the trees parted to reveal a wide glade, perfectly circular. And at its center stood a tall tower, made entirely of white stone and pale wood. It was elegant and strange, rising high above the treetops, yet feeling as if it had always belonged here. Thin streams of mist curled around its base like gentle fingers. At the base of the tower stood a door made of polished oak. It opened as she approached, not with a creak or clang, but with a quiet sigh, as if the tower itself had been expecting her. Inside, the space was dimly lit with hanging orbs that floated just below the ceiling. Shelves curved along the walls, filled with jars, scrolls, and strange instruments that chimed faintly in the still air. And at the far end of the room stood a figure. He was tall, robed in deep blue silk embroidered with stars. His hair flowed like a waterfall of silver, and his eyes, they held galaxies, infinite and calm. As Elenor stepped closer, he nodded once in acknowledgement, as though greeting someone not for the first time, but after a long absence. "Welcome, dreamer," he said softly. "I am the keeper." Eleanor's voice was quiet, reverent. The keeper of what? Of this garden, of memory, of rest, and of forgotten dreams, he replied, turning toward a large circular table in the center of the room. Upon it lay dozens of glass orbs, each glowing with a soft light. He picked one up gently and held it toward her. "Do you remember this one?" She stared into the orb and saw something familiar. Herself, as a child, standing in the rain with arms wide open, laughing as the drops fell across her cheeks. She remembered the joy, the freedom, the pure presence of that moment. "I had forgotten," she whispered. He nodded. "Most do. That is why this place exists, to return what time and pain have tried to take away." He placed the orb gently back on the table. Every person who finds their way here brings with them dreams they've abandoned, moments lost beneath worry, pain, or duty. "You are no different, Elenor." She looked up at him, surprised. "You know my name? I know the name your heart whispers when you are still. The name you gave yourself before the world told you who you should be. Her eyes filled again, not with sorrow, but something gentler. Recognition, maybe. Relief. He gestured to the shelves lining the tower walls. These are not my memories. They are yours, stored here until you are ready to hold them again. Elenor stepped closer and brushed her fingers over a scroll. It opened beneath her touch, revealing an image of her sitting beneath a cherry tree, writing poetry in a journal she hadn't thought of in years. She remembered that tree. It had grown in the backyard of her childhood home, long gone now. She turned back to the keeper. "What do I do with all of this?" "Nothing," he said with a small smile. "Not yet. The garden is not a place of doing. It is a place of being. Let it remember for you. Let yourself rest." "But what if I don't want to leave?" she asked quietly. He walked toward a staircase, winding up the tower. "Then don't. Not until you are ready. The garden does not keep you. It welcomes you." They ascended the stairs together. Each floor revealed more of the tower's mysteries, a room filled with glowing feathers that hummed softly, another where wind blew through chimes of crystal, creating lullabies. At the top was a circular room open to the twilight sky. No roof, only air and stars. From here, she could see the entire garden. It stretched endlessly in all directions, softly lit, dotted with cottages, paths, ponds, and glades. She saw others, people like her, walking slowly, sitting in silence, lying in hammocks strung between starlit trees. No one hurried. No one called out. And yet, everyone was somehow connected, as if sharing a single dream. "It is beautiful," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "It is yours," the keeper replied. They stood there together for a long time, saying nothing, just breathing, just being. And when Elenor finally turned to descend the tower again, she knew something inside her had shifted. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but like the soft settling of snow, a quiet peace she hadn't known she needed. At the base of the tower, the fox was waiting. It looked up at her with those moonlit eyes and turned once again toward a new path. This time, she didn't hesitate. She followed. The room of unspoken things. The fox padded softly ahead of her, its paws leaving no prints on the mossy path. Elenor followed, each step light, yet grounded. She felt changed, not fully, not finally, but opening, like a door long sealed that had finally begun to ease from its hinges. The air grew warmer as they walked. The mist thinned into golden dust, and the trees around her seemed to lean in slightly, listening, welcoming. Soon, the fox led her to a wooden arch wrapped in morning glory vines. At the top of the arch, carved so subtly it was almost invisible, were the words, "Here, what you do not say will finally be heard." She passed beneath it. The path narrowed again, then opened into a wide glade. At the center stood a circular building made of smooth, pale stone. No doors, no windows. Only a soft light that seemed to rise from within its walls. The fox sat just outside it and curled its tail around its feet. Elenor understood. She would go in alone. She touched the stone wall. It felt warm, like skin. And as her fingers rested there, the wall melted silently away, revealing the interior, a round chamber with a domed ceiling painted to look like the night sky. In the center of the room sat a shallow pool of water, perfectly still, glowing faintly blue. There was no furniture, no words, no presence but her own. She stepped inside. The stone wall reformed behind her, not to trap, but to protect. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It was alive. It filled the room with meaning, wrapping her in stillness that had weight, warmth, and intention. Elenor approached the pool and sat at its edge. The surface did not reflect her face. Instead, it showed movement. Gentle swirls of light and shadow, like a memory half remembered. She stared into it, and slowly she began to feel things rise inside her. First came the simple ones. A quiet ache in her chest, the sadness of being far from home, the tension she'd carried in her shoulders for years. Then, deeper ones, older. The tears she'd never cried when she'd lost someone she loved. The words she never spoke to someone who hurt her. Not out of fear, but because she didn't know how. The anger she tucked into her ribs. The loneliness she had masked with smiles. The pool shimmered gently, and the room seemed to breathe with her. Without speaking, without formulating any thought, Elenor released. It was not dramatic. There were no screams or sudden sobs, just a slow unraveling, as if each breath untied one more knot. Her chest rose and fell, and with each breath, something inside her loosened. The tension behind her eyes faded. The tightness in her jaw relaxed. The heaviness in her stomach began to lift. Her lips parted, and though she made no sound, the silence accepted her. The garden heard her. Every thought she never said, every sorrow she swallowed, every what if, every I wish, every silent scream from sleepless nights. It heard it all, and it answered, not with words, but with warmth. From above, soft beams of silver light descended. They didn't touch her skin, but wrapped around her like a shawl, pulsing gently. The pool before her shimmered and changed. Now she saw a vision, not of the past, not quite of the future. It was her walking freely through the garden, shoulders light, laughter spilling from her lips like water. She saw herself with others, embracing them. She saw herself sitting beneath a tree, writing again, singing, dancing barefoot through dew-covered grass. She saw herself whole, not perfect, just free. She blinked, and the vision faded, but it had already sunk into her bones. Elenor stood. The room no longer felt heavy. It felt held. As she turned to leave, the stone wall silently melted once more. Outside, the fox was waiting, as if no time had passed at all. It rose without a word and began walking again. Elenor followed. They passed under another arch of vines. This one bore no inscription. The message had already been given. As they walked on, the garden began to open wider. Paths lined with crystals, flowers blooming at her presence, trees parting slightly to reveal small groves and hidden streams. The wind carried soft chimes, and a feeling of warmth, not physical, but soul deep, settled into her chest. She passed other people now, travelers like herself, some alone, some walking in pairs, some sitting beneath trees in meditation. They nodded to her as if to say, "We see you. We know. We've felt it too." And she nodded back. There was no need for speech, no need for names. Here in the Garden of Eternal Twilight, connection ran deeper than words, and what once felt hidden was now held. The House of Forgotten Joys. The path was softer now, padded with moss that cushioned her steps. The trees whispered quietly, as if singing to themselves, and the fox, ever watchful, ever calm, continued on ahead of her with graceful ease. The light above never changed, yet Elenor felt that something within her was beginning to shift. The sadness was not gone, but it no longer held her like it once had. In its place was a warmth she hadn't known in a long while, a lightness, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. After a time, the trees opened into a wide, sun-dappled field filled with wildflowers. Butterflies hovered in slow motion, and the scent of honeysuckle danced through the air. At the far end of the field stood a quaint wooden house painted in soft pastels, its walls decorated with carved shapes of stars, moons, musical notes, and spinning tops. It looked like something from a child's dream, whimsical, gentle, playful. Elenor smiled without meaning to. The fox gave her a final glance, then disappeared into the flowers, leaving her at the doorstep of the little house. She stepped forward and opened the door. Inside, the space was unlike anything she had expected. Toys, musical instruments, books with shimmering covers, and pillows shaped like clouds were scattered everywhere. Lanterns floated lazily along the ceiling, casting shifting patterns of soft light across the walls. A gentle, tinkling melody, like wind chimes and lullabies, played in the air. At the center of the room sat a long table. Around it were chairs of all sizes, and each one had a plate holding a small, colorful cake topped with glittering sugar petals. No one else was present, and yet the room buzzed with joy, like echoes of laughter had soaked into the wood. Elenor slowly walked toward the table. A note sat on her plate. It read, "This is your joy. You only forgot where you left it." As she read the words, a memory unfolded in her mind, vivid and full. She saw herself as a girl, twirling in the garden behind her grandmother's house, dress flowing, arms raised to the sky. There was no fear in her then, no burden, just wind and sun and the sound of her own laughter. The vision faded, and she felt tears prick her eyes, not from sorrow, but from wonder. How had she forgotten that feeling? How had she let it slip through her fingers? She picked up the small cake and took a bite. Sweet, light, and filled with something impossible to name. With each chew, warmth bloomed in her chest. Not nostalgia, not longing, but joy. Real joy. The kind that didn't need a reason. And as if called by that feeling, the house shifted. A door opened that hadn't been there before, revealing a hallway lined with paintings. Elenor walked through, and as she did, each painting shimmered to life. A girl dancing barefoot in the rain. A teenager singing off-key with friends, uncaring of how she sounded. A young woman spinning in circles beneath a sky full of stars, laughing with her whole soul. Each scene pulsed with light. They weren't just memories, they were feelings she had left behind. One painting, near the end of the hallway, caught her breath. It showed her sitting at a small table, painting with her fingers on a sheet of paper. Her face was lit with pure wonder. Her hands were covered in color, blue, green, pink, and gold. she stepped closer and remembered. It had been a rainy afternoon. She'd been 5, alone but not lonely. The world had seemed like magic then. Anything was possible. "I used to believe," she whispered, and the house seemed to reply, not in words, but in feeling. "You still can." A soft giggle echoed down the hallway. Elenor turned and saw something she hadn't expected. A child stood in the next room, small, barefoot, dressed in a simple nightgown. Her eyes were wide and bright, and Elenor knew her instantly. It was her. The child stared at her with no fear, only curiosity. Then she smiled and ran off into the next room, disappearing behind a curtain of hanging flowers. Elenor followed, breath caught in her chest. The next room was filled with floating orbs of light and large pillows scattered on the floor. The child version of herself was spinning in the middle, arms stretched out, laughing, the same way she had in the garden so many years ago. Elenor watched for a long time, her chest aching and swelling all at once. Then the girl stopped spinning and looked up at her. "Do you remember now?" the child asked. Eleanor's voice cracked. "I think so." "Then come play." She reached out a small hand. Elenor hesitated only a moment, and then, gently, slowly, she took it. And they danced. They twirled, they laughed, they played games with the glowing orbs. They made music by tapping the pillows. They told stories without words. The room melted around them, shifting into fields, forests, mountaintops, skies, wherever they imagined. Time did not exist, only presence, only play, only freedom. Eventually, the child sat down on a large cushioned seat and looked at Elenor with soft eyes. "You're not here to stay, are you?" she asked. Elenor knelt in front of her. "I don't know, but I think I'm here to remember." The child nodded. "You forgot how to laugh, but it's okay. I kept it safe." Elenor touched her cheek, tears flowing freely now. "Thank you." The child leaned forward and whispered into her ear, "Don't grow up too much. Grown-ups forget how to dream." And then, like mist dissolving in morning light, the child was gone. Elenor stood in the silent, glowing room. Her heart was full, overflowing really, with warmth and memories that had once been lost. She breathed deeply, closed her eyes, and smiled. She walked back through the hallway of paintings. This time, she did not cry. She remembered. And when she stepped out of the house of forgotten joys, the fox was waiting again, tail swishing gently. Elenor didn't speak. She simply nodded, and together they walked on. The bridge of still waters. The fox led Elenor once more, padding silently along a path that glowed faintly underfoot. The light beneath her feet wasn't harsh or magical in the way stories often described it. It was gentle, like moonlight through soft mist. The garden itself seemed to be changing, opening deeper layers of itself to her. The laughter of the child still echoed in her heart, and her steps felt lighter than before. Not weightless, but balanced, like she had finally stopped dragging invisible chains behind her. They passed groves where wind played soft melodies through crystal leaves, and clear pools that shimmered like starlight. In the distance, she saw others walking slow paths, some alone, some in quiet pairs, and she understood. No one spoke here unless they needed to, and most needs were already met by simply being. The fox slowed. Before them stretched a wide river, its surface perfectly still, as though made of glass. Trees lined the banks, their branches dipping gently into the water, creating endless reflections. A single bridge arched across the river, simple in design, built from pale wood that pulsed with a soft, steady glow. There was a sign at the entrance. To cross, you must meet your shadow. Elenor stood at the edge, heart beating slowly. The river made no sound. The bridge waited in perfect stillness. The fox did not cross this time. Instead, it lay down on the moss and rested its head on its paws, watching her with calm eyes. This, Elenor knew, was a step she had to take alone. She placed one foot on the bridge. The moment she did, the sound of the whirl faded. No birds, no wind, just silence and a gentle sense of anticipation. The bridge beneath her feet was firm, but the air around her shimmered slightly, like the world was holding its breath. She walked slowly, each step echoing faintly. Halfway across, the air shifted again. From the other end of the bridge, a figure appeared. At first, it was only a silhouette, tall, familiar. But as it moved closer, she saw the face clearly. It was her, not as a child, not as she was now, but as all the moments in between. This Elenor had tired eyes, a worried brow, lips that trembled as though holding back words for years. She looked at Elenor with a kind of gentle sorrow, not accusing, not angry, just present, real. Elenor froze, her breath catching. "You look," she began. "Like everything you carried," the other said. "Everything you swallowed to keep moving. Every 'I'm fine' you forced through your teeth." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I didn't know what else to do." "I know," her shadow said. "That's why I held it for you." They stood in silence, the still water below reflecting them both perfectly. Elenor stepped closer. "I always thought I had to stay strong," she whispered. Her shadow nodded. "And you did. But strength is in silence. It's truth, even when it's soft." Elenor reached out, and her hand met her shadow's. Solid, warm, real. They didn't merge. They didn't vanish. Instead, they sat together on the edge of the bridge, legs dangling over the still water. "I'm tired," Elenor said. Her shadow smiled softly. "Then rest. You don't need to carry all of me. Let me walk beside you instead." The two versions of herself looked out across the water, and for the first time, Elenor understood. She didn't need to erase her pain to find peace. She didn't need to forget the hard things to remember the beautiful ones. She just needed to accept all of it, light and dark, laughter and loss. She looked at her shadow again. "Will you stay?" Her shadow nodded. "Always. But I won't weigh you down anymore. I'll walk in step with you, not behind." Elenor stood. Her shadow rose too. Together, they walked to the end of the bridge. And as she stepped onto the far bank, the figure beside her faded. Not disappeared, but dissolved gently into her. Not gone, rejoined. The world around her resumed its quiet rhythm. The distant chimes, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmuring of water. She turned to look back at the bridge and saw that her reflection now shimmered across the surface, whole and undistorted. The fox was waiting again, just ahead. Its eyes met hers, and this time, Elenor smiled, fully, freely. She didn't need to ask where they were going next. Wherever it was, she was ready. The grove of names, Elenor walked quietly through the tall grass, the fox just ahead. After the stillness of the bridge, everything around her felt vibrant again. Not louder, the garden never shouted, but more alive. The flowers seemed to turn toward her now. The trees leaned in slightly, as if nodding in greeting. Even the path beneath her feet seemed to guide her with a subtle rhythm, steady and sure. They passed through a grove of small trees with twisting trunks and wide leaves that shimmered with a silvery sheen. It wasn't long before she noticed something strange. Each tree bore a name, carved into its bark, not with sharp blades, but with graceful, flowing curves, as though the letters had grown there naturally. The names glowed faintly in the twilight. She slowed, reading a few as she passed. Adira, Junin, Tala, Ruin, names she didn't recognize, but that somehow made her heart ache. Then she saw one that made her stop in her tracks. Elenor. It was carved into the smooth bark of a slender tree near the edge of the grove. Unlike the others, hers had more than one name below it, in smaller, fainter script. Daughter, friend, traveler, caretaker, dreamer. Each name pulsed gently, not just with light, but with memory, and each one stirred something deep inside her. As she stood before the tree, a soft voice spoke, not from outside, but from within. These are the names the world gave you. Some you claimed, some you wore like borrowed robes, but they are not all of who you are. Elenor rested her hand on the tree's bark. Warmth spread up her arm. Not heat, but the kind of warmth that comes from being seen, truly seen. The kind of warmth that says, "You belong here." She closed her eyes, letting the garden. She saw herself caring for others, putting their needs first, always kind, always dependable. She saw herself saying yes when she wanted to say no. She saw herself shaping her voice to match expectations. She saw herself smiling when she wanted to cry, laughing to hide the ache, playing the roles others needed. But beneath it all, another name stirred, a name not given to her, a name she chose. The tree pulsed under her hand, and a final name appeared beneath all the others. Alive, she gasped softly. That was it. Not a title, not a duty, not a role. Just alive. The word bloomed through her like sunrise. For the first time in years, maybe in her whole life, she aligned herself to feel what that truly meant. To be, not perform. To breathe, not achieve. To exist without needing to justify her existence. She leaned her forehead against the bark and let the tears come. Not sad tears, not joyful ones either. Just release. When she pulled away, the tree shimmered once more, and the names faded gently into its surface. Not gone, but no longer needed in the same way. Behind her, the grove stretched farther, and she realized, filled with trees just like hers. Names lined each trunk, some bright, some faded, some still forming. And in that quiet space, she understood. Everyone here had wandered through life, collecting names, trying to fit them all. But here, in the Garden of Eternal Twilight, they were learning that who they were had never needed naming at all. She turned to find the fox sitting patiently just beyond the grove, near a low stone wall covered in ivy. It rose as she approached, and together they passed through a narrow opening into another part of the garden. Ahead lay a wide path, flanked by tall grasses that swayed without wind. Birds called softly overhead, and the scent of jasmine returned to the air. Elenor felt it now, a growing stillness inside her. Not numbness, not silence, but balance. There would always be parts of her that answered to other names: daughter, friend, caretaker, dreamer. But beneath them all, above them all, she was simply herself. And that, finally, was enough. The Sleepwalker's Library. The path widened and curved gently uphill, where a strange structure slowly came into view. Not a building, not exactly, but something more organic, like a cathedral shaped by nature itself. Columns of stone rose into archways made of tree branches, latticed with vines that bloomed in soft lavender light. Between them, tall stacks of books stood exposed to the open air, bound not in leather, but in bark, petals, and moonlight. The scent of old pages and wildflowers mingled in the cool breeze. Eleanor's breath caught. It was a library, but like no library she'd ever seen. She stepped closer, and the fox remained outside the first archway, watching her with quiet trust. Inside, everything felt suspended, like time had slowed to a heartbeat between moments. Soft orbs of light floated between shelves. As she moved past one aisle, a book slid gently from its place and hovered in front of her. Its cover was soft and pale blue. A single word rested on it: October. She opened it. There on the pages were scenes from her life, not described, but illustrated in glowing memory. A walk in crisp air under golden leaves. The first time she felt safe with someone new. The moment she laughed so hard she cried at something she couldn't even remember anymore. Each page brought her back to sensations more than facts. The warmth of tea in her hands, the softness of a scarf, the ache of missing someone who had moved on without saying goodbye. As she turned the final page, the book dissolved into gentle light, and Elenor understood. She didn't need to hold the memory forever. It had lived its purpose. Another book approached. This one said, "Questions that never found answers." She hesitated. The title alone made her chest tighten. But she opened it. Inside were pages filled with scribbled thoughts, fragmented sentences, and looping lines that trailed off mid-word. Why wasn't I enough? What if I had just said? Was it my fault? When? If only I'd noticed sooner. The questions were painful, familiar, like the echo of long, restless nights. Elenor felt the old pull to try and solve them, to answer them once and for all. But this time, she didn't. Instead, she closed the book, and as she did, the cover changed. The title shifted, becoming Things I No Longer Need to Know. The book floated away, light as a feather. She wandered deeper into the library, and the same pattern repeated. Books of joys, losses, forgotten songs, old ambitions, letters she'd never sent, dreams that changed shape over time. Each one opened gently, then faded softly once their weight had been acknowledged. Eventually, she came upon a small desk tucked beneath a flowering canopy. A blank journal rested there, open to the first page. A single question was written in delicate silver ink. What truth brings you peace tonight? Elenor picked up the quill beside it. It didn't shake in her hand the way it used to when she faced a blank page. She didn't write a long answer. She simply wrote, "I don't need to understand everything to rest. I don't need to be perfect to be worthy of peace. I'm allowed to let go." As she placed the quill down, the page shimmered and the journal gently closed. She stood up, feeling lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because not everything needed to be. Sometimes peace comes not from having all the answers, but from realizing you never needed them all in the first place. She stepped out of the library and found the fox waiting at the edge of a field now bathed in soft twilight. The stars above had started to appear, not piercing or sharp, but muted, like soft pinpricks in deep velvet. The fox began walking again, and Elenor followed, heart beating calmly. Every step took her farther from the noise of her old world, and deeper into a kind of knowing that didn't need words. The mirror pool! The fox led Elenor down a path lined with soft moss and moonflowers. The air felt thinner here, not in a breathless way, but as if sound itself had gently faded. No birdsong, no wind, just stillness. At the end of the trail, the trees parted to reveal a pool of water so still and clear it looked like polished glass. The surface reflected the sky perfectly. Stars above mirrored stars below. And in the center of the pool floated a single glowing lily, its petals slowly opening and closing like a heartbeat. The mirror pool. Elenor didn't need to be told its name. She knew it, deep in her bones. This place had lived in her dreams long before she ever walked the garden. She stepped toward the edge. The fox remained behind, curling up at the base of a tree, its eyes half closed, not watching, not guiding, simply resting. This was a part of the journey she had to take alone. Kneeling at the water's edge, Elenor looked down. At first, she saw only herself, or rather the face she recognized. Soft, tired eyes, a line between her brows from years of thinking too hard. Lips that rarely spoke her own needs aloud. But as the pool shimmered, something shifted. The reflection deepened. Now, she saw her as a child, wide-eyed, hopeful, laughing for no reason at all. She saw herself running barefoot, falling, getting up, brushing the dirt from her knees, and racing toward the sky again. Then came the teenager, uncertain, searching, sometimes lost, sometimes wildly free, full of questions she never dared ask. Then the adult, composed, reliable, but often aching behind her smile. The pool rippled. All those versions of herself stood beside each other, not in conflict, but in silent companionship. And then, something extraordinary. The images merged, and what emerged was not just a reflection, but her essence. She was light and shadow, strength and softness, doubt and wonder. She was the choices she'd made and the dreams she'd set aside. She was her healing and her hurt, her fears and her forgiveness. She saw it all, and she didn't look away. A voice, her own, echoed softly in the space around her, as if the garden itself were speaking through her heart. I am not broken. I am becoming. I am not lost. I am returning. I do not need to chase the light. I am the light. The lily at the center of the pool bloomed fully then, releasing a faint trail of golden mist into the air. Elenor felt her entire being soften, the tension in her shoulders gone, The weight behind her eyes lifted, the ache in her chest replaced with warmth. She reached out and touched the surface of the water. It didn't ripple. Instead, it welcomed her fingertips like silk. A soft glow spread from the contact, and she felt herself seen by the pool. Not judged, not analyzed, just understood. When she stood again, the stars had shifted above. The garden was guiding her toward one final path, one final moment. She turned and looked at the fox, who now stood quietly beside her once more. Its golden eyes glinted in the twilight. Without words, they began walking. And as they walked, Elenor knew she was different now. Not because she had changed into something new, but because she had finally, quietly returned to who she'd always been. The gate of rest. The final path was the softest of them all. Grass brushed gently against Eleanor's ankles, silver-tipped and whispering like old lullabies. Overhead, the sky had turned a shade of deep blue that only appeared in dreams. Just before dawn, but not quite night. A velvet in between. She walked beside the fox, who no longer led, but matched her step for step. Like an equal, like an old friend, who knew she could find her own way now. Ahead, a great arch stood at the grand or towering, but simple and graceful, woven from willow branches and sleeping ivy. Hanging from its center was a small wind chime made of crystal leaves. It didn't ring, not yet. Beyond the arch was only mist, not darkness, not light, just a peaceful veil that shimmered like clouds kissed by moonlight. Elenor stopped before it and took a breath, a deep, calm, full breath. She turned to the fox. Its golden eyes gazed into hers, and in them, she saw everything they had been through together. The silence of the gate, the music of the willow trees, the memory books, the floating bridges, and the mirror pool. She reached out slowly, resting a hand on the fox's head. Its fur was warmer than she remembered, almost glowing. "Thank you," she whispered. The fox gave a quiet nod, then stepped back into the grass and sat, watching peacefully, its eyes gently closing. Elenor turned to the arch once more. The chime above gave one soft sound, ting, like a heartbeat folding into a dream. She stepped through. The mist surrounded her, not with cold, but with warmth, like the embrace of a long-lost friend. There was no fear, no urgency, no thought of return, only stillness. And in that stillness, she let go. She let go of names, of stories, of timelines and doubts. She let go of needing to be understood, of needing to explain anything. She let go of the worry that she hadn't done enough. And in that surrender, something beautiful happened. She remembered the sound of her soul, a soft hum, older than her name, the sound of being exactly where she was meant to be. In the mist, she lay down, not on a floor, not on grass, but on something gentler than any surface, as if the world itself had become a cradle. She closed her eyes, and the garden held her. Time slipped away. No more chapters, no more paths, just peace. Epilogue. Some say the Garden of Eternal Twilight is just a dream, a quiet fantasy whispered between stars. But others know it's a place we all visit when we are ready to rest, when the world grows loud and our hearts grow heavy, when we stop searching and start listening. It's not far, it's not lost. It waits behind closed eyes in the breath between thoughts. It begins when we allow ourselves to be still. And if you listen closely now, You might hear the wind chime too. Ting. Sleep well, traveler. You are safe here. You are home.